Welcome to everyone who's joined in for this WSA Friday webinar. They're going really well. We're delighted to have an audience numbers like we're getting. So I hope you're really finding these useful. Tonight's session is going to be presented by Cal Major. For those of you who are not aware of who Cal is, he's an epic adventure paddling from Land's End to John O'Groats, an amazing documentary that I've sat down and watched as well, and really looking forward to listening to Cal's stories and her stories of her adventures. One thing I would say, if anyone is new to Zoom, a couple of really key points. On the bottom left hand of your screen, if you're using a laptop, there is a mute button. So if you could make sure that you've hit that and that you've muted so that we don't have any dogs or background noise. And the second thing, is we have a chat function. So if you have any questions, it would be appreciated if you could send the questions via the chat function. And this week, what we're going to do is I'll be asking Cal the questions at the end of her presentation. And I will apologize if I don't get around to asking all of them. The presentation is scheduled for roughly an hour. So here we go, Cal. If it's over to you, a brief introduction. Really looking forward to this one, and thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so again, thank you to all you guys for being here this evening. I appreciate that a few months ago, Friday nights might not have been us all sitting around our laptops and chatting about adventures. We might have been out on adventures, but it's great to have so many people here. And huge thanks to Chris and to Ben at the Water Skills Academy for everything that they're doing, both keeping us safe and informed and for putting on these webinars. I'm sure you'll agree that having lots of stuff to keep us inspired and entertained is really important at the moment. So I'm really chuffed to be here with you guys tonight. So I'm just going to share my screen with you, so bear with me a moment. I've got a little presentation for you. That's the one.
Yep, all good, Cal. I can see that.
Okay, great. So tonight I thought I'd speak to you about some adventure stories. These aren't stories I normally tell in my presentation. So I'm a veterinary surgeon, but I'm also an ocean campaigner. So all my campaigns focus around ocean optimism, plastic pollution, and most of my talks and events will be very much focused on environmental themes. So tonight I wanted to do something a little bit different, which is talk about the kindness of strangers that I've experienced in some of my expeditions. I don't know about you, but in the last few weeks, I've really noticed some amazing acts of humanity, both to people that we love and care about, and also to people we've never met before. And I've experienced that on several occasions during my expeditions, and normally at the moments when I absolutely need it most. It's amazing how people pop up when you need them most, but don't even know what you need. So I wanted to share some of those stories with you today. So my first experience stand-up paddleboarding was in 2014. I moved down to Devon for a job as a small animal vet. And I moved in with 3 guys who were stand-up paddleboarders, and they were avid water lovers. And one day they decided they were going to take me stand-up paddleboarding. And from the minute I stood up on that board on the water, I was hooked. There was just the most amazing sense of freedom, and I felt like with my staff in my hand I was a warrior woman standing on the water. I fell off a couple of times, but I still had the most wonderful experience, and I really took to paddleboarding like a fish to water, really. And any moment that I wasn't working as a vet, I was using stand-up paddleboarding to basically alleviate all of the stress that came along with that job. And I was exploring coastlines. I surfed a lot as well, so when I wasn't paddling, I was surfing, and I was finding lots and lots of plastic on the beaches that I was paddling to and that I was surfing at. Became very, very passionate about the amount of plastic I was finding on the beaches. I was really outraged by it. And that's really how my expedition started. I wanted to, in 2014, there wasn't much in the media about plastic pollution. And I wanted to really kind of bring a positive message to the plastic pollution crisis, of just how much we can all do to actually individually affect the crisis. And one of the most common things I was finding on beaches was plastic bottles. in particular plastic water bottles, which really, really angered me, because in the UK, we live with this amazing resource, which is clean, free drinking water. And I really, really wanted to sort of deliver that positive message that actually we all have the option to choose a refillable water bottle and protect the ocean at the same time. And so I decided to combine my love of paddleboarding with my outrage at plastic, and I set up the campaign Paddle Against Plastic and decided to paddleboard around the Cornish coast. So it was about 300 miles from Plymouth in South Devon to Croyd in North Devon, encompassing the whole of the Cornish coast in between. And I went into the expedition completely naively. So my idea of what this trip around Cornwall in the summer would be like was flat calm seas and sunsets and dolphins, and I had images of finishing with a six-pack and a suntan, and the reality was very, very different. And for 3 weeks, it was a friend and I who were paddling. We were hit with head-high waves, gale force winds, fog and angry seals. It was very, very different to what I'd expected. I learned so much as I went. I learned how to navigate, I learned about tides, I learned how to read a wind forecast. And it was a real learning curve. And even though the conditions were far from ideal for most of the trip, I learned so much about my own strength. I learned how to wild camp. I learned how to make a fire, which apparently wasn't just throwing a load of driftwood on a beach and trying to set light to it. And I learned the quality of a really good quality dry bag if you want to sleep in a dry sleeping bag. And my friend and I, we battled and we battled and we battled, and we fought against conditions that maybe we shouldn't have fought against, and maybe we should have sat those days out. But we also had some amazing days on the water as well. And one of those days was on the north coast of Cornwall. I was paddling towards a place called Port Quin, and we'd already paddled about 20 miles that day, and we sheltered in a little place called Port Isaac, I think it was called. And we stopped there for a bite to eat and a nap while the tides changed. And when the tides were ready to go again, when the tides were flowing in the right direction again, and we got back on the water for the final 5 miles to Port Quin, we were in this really beautiful sheltered bay. We paddled out of this beautiful sheltered bay and around the corner of a headland. And as we came around the headland, we were hit by this wall of waves. They were about 6 foot, these waves, and they were crashing directly into this massive cliff, this massive big seawall. And there was a big onshore wind as well, and we were basically battling into these massive waves and into this massive forceful wind. And bear in mind, this was my first ever expedition. All I knew how to do was to battle. So I just fought and I fought and I fought, and I paddled as hard as I could, and I was hyperventilating, I was running out of breath, and my friend was yelling at me. He was this big strong man, you know, he paddled his way through the waves just about. He was yelling at me, "Carol, paddle, you have to paddle, you need to paddle." And I was paddling and I wasn't getting anywhere, and I was getting closer and closer to this cliff. And I was extremely scared and suddenly very, very aware of my own mortality and perhaps naivety to think that I was able to do this challenge. And I battled and battled for about 20 or 30 minutes, and eventually popped out the back of these waves, but behind the danger, and made my way into Port Quin, which is a very, very, very deep sheltered bay. And I landed on the beach at Port Quin and proceeded to roll up in my bivvy bag and basically pass out. This was my undrunk cup of tea because I'd passed out at the side of the beach. And my friend Jack and I, we were sat there and we were absolutely exhausted, and we must have looked very, very bedraggled. And a man who we'd never met before came over and spoke to us, and he'd seen us paddle in with our boards full of bags, and obviously seen our sunburnt faces and our utter exhaustion as we landed on the beach. And he asked what we were doing, and I explained to him why we were paddling around Cornwall to try and talk to people about this issue of plastic. And instantly he invited us into his holiday home where he was staying there in the bay. He let us shower, which was a joy. We hadn't showered for 2 weeks. He let us use his phone to call the Coast Guard to let them know we were safe. He let me call my mum to let her know I was safe. And while I was showering, I didn't realise what was going on while I was showering. I came out into the kitchen where he was sat with his 2 daughters, and he was actually on the Surfers Against Sewage website buying reusable water bottles for him and all of his family members. And I think that was my first real acknowledgement of how actually putting yourself through a challenge and putting yourself out there in a dangerous situation or taking on an adventure can be a really wonderful vehicle for capturing people's imagination and getting people on board. And he was so kind to us. In the moment when we needed somebody the most, he was there. And I think that was one of my first experiences of the kindness of strangers. And he didn't want anything in return. He just wanted to help because he believed in what we were doing. And it was very, very heartwarming. And several other times around Cornwall, you know, we had people leave a tab at a coffee shop for us to get a couple of coffees, which was just what we needed at that moment in time. And having gone into this expedition completely naively, I came out not only having learnt all these physical things, but having learnt to trust people that I've not met before, and learnt that people will be there for you and help you out if they believe in your cause. And that felt really, really special. So the following year, 2017 now, I really wanted to take on another expedition. I'd loved my trip around Cornwall, even though it nearly broke me. And this time I wanted to do a solo expedition completely alone. And so I decided to paddle around the Isle of Skye in Scotland. The reason being that the Isle of Skye, it's renowned for wild beauty, animals, sea life. It's also renowned for waves and wind and very strong tides, so I knew it was going to be a challenge. But I also wanted to demonstrate that even these really remote and beautiful wildlife-rich places are no less vulnerable to plastic pollution. And true to form, the first day, which started off perfectly, absolutely beautiful, you know, calm waters, didn't finish that way. And as I came around a headland, again, the wind direction was very different to where I'd been paddling from, hadn't quite read the charts right in terms of the wind direction, and ended up being blown out to sea on my own on a stand-up paddleboard with 3 massive bags strapped to the board, which were basically acting as sails, blowing me out to sea. And it was very, very terrifying. And again, it took all my strength, every last ounce of energy I had within me to battle this wind and to fight and to drive my way back to land. And that night, I sat in my tent shivering with absolutely no doubt in my mind that that was it. I wasn't going to carry on. I couldn't carry on. It was too dangerous. It was too hard. It was too terrifying. And the next morning I woke up to flat, calm ocean, beautiful sunshine, not a breath of wind in the air, and decided I had to carry on. And so I proceeded to paddle for 2 weeks around the Isle of Skye for about 20 miles a day. This photo here is taken in Elgol when I paddled through a storm at 5 o'clock in the morning to get to a place called Glenbrittle. And through being alone, through not having anybody there to bounce ideas off, to bounce decisions off, to physically help me, I learnt a real profound lesson of how strong I was inside. And I didn't realise, I didn't want to give myself credit for. I had no acknowledgement of just how physically and mentally powerful I was to make these decisions and to take these journeys every day. And I would certainly never have started the expedition if you'd have told me half the incidences I'd have come across before I set out on my paddleboard. And yet being out there alone, I learned how to dig deep and how to find my strength and how to learn my limits as well. And there was one day in particular which really sticks in my mind, and it was just the most perfect day out on the water. The first half of the day, it was actually travelling from Glenbrittle. I was stuck in Glenbrittle for 3 days while there was a big storm out to sea. And when I went back out on the water, it was very, very choppy, but it was absolutely glorious. And for an entire day, I was out on my own. I paddled about 20 miles and made it to this beautiful little island called Way Island. And I can't remember how big it was. I think it's only, I don't know, maybe 300 meters across or something like that. A tiny little island that was really sheltered in this bay. And being out there alone in this beautiful water, just surrounded by wildlife, gave me the most immense sense of peace and a real realization of how noisy our lives are and how ultimately perfect nature is, especially when you have the opportunity to spend peaceful time there. And being there quiet and contemplative really helped me settle into a rhythm of thinking about the things that actually mattered to me and letting go of the things that it really didn't. All that noise and busyness and silliness of daily life that we engage ourselves in. And I basically stopped on this island for 6 hours while I waited for the tide to turn, and I had a nap and I made some food, and I just revelled in the quiet and the nothingness, having nothing to do. I had no phone signal. I could just sit there and watch the water for 6 hours and watch the tide gently lap against the stones out there on the beach. And when it came to time for the tide to be in the right direction again, I set out from the water, set out on the water again, and paddled another 15 or so miles to my destination that evening, which was a beach called Lorgill Bay. And at Lorgill Bay, I discovered something that I really wasn't expecting to discover. And we've got a short video here, so I really hope you can hear the sound. It's only a couple of minutes long.
Waking up to a load of sheep and cows on the beach. It's disgusting. So this is breaking my heart. This cow is basically chewing on this piece of fishing net, and I think she swallowed part of it, and she doesn't know what to do, and she's just been stood here for about 20 minutes now, just chewing. And if that piece of fishing net goes down into her rumen, she's dead. It's horrible. I feel so helpless. I'm a vet. If you just have a crush, it'll be fine. I can't go any closer to her than I already have. She could headbutt me, she could fan me, she could kill me. She could quite easily kill me. So I think what I'm going to do is pack up quickly and get out onto the water where hopefully there's some signal, and phone the non-urgent police number and get them to contact the farm. And I'll update on our cow. You can see it behind me. She's decided that fishing nets don't taste so good after all. She's managed to irritate, so belch the fishing net up. She's tried to pick it up a couple more times, and after about a tense 6, and me flapping around and running at her like a mad thing to try and stop her from doing it, she's finally stopped attempting to eat the bloody fishing net. But in a matter of time until she finds another tasty bit of fishing net, or until one of her mates does, or until a sheep does. It's not just the animals out in the ocean here that's affected by this stuff, it's everything.
So then after that episode happened, I had to put on my soggy neoprene trousers and my soggy boots and get back out on the water again, and paddle around one of the most notorious headlands around the Isle of Skye, one of the biggest tidal races. And I was pretty shaken by the experience with the cow. I was really upset. As I said in the video, I felt really helpless. You know, I've trained for years and years to be able to help animals, and all of a sudden here I was completely helpless for this lovely creature. And I was fairly upset about it. And the headland that I then had to paddle around was very exhilarating, and it all went smoothly and to plan, thankfully. But I was absolutely exhausted when I made it to this beach here that I decided to camp on that evening. I was emotionally exhausted, physically exhausted. I was very, very smelly, and I basically pitched my tent up here and decided that I was going to call it a day for the evening. This was sort of early evening, late afternoon, early evening. Walked down to the water's edge to wash up my pots that I just made my lunch in, and came back to find my tent surrounded by more cows, and these ones had big spiky horns, and there were lots of them. And I don't have a picture of just how many of them were surrounding my tent, because I was running back to the shore because they were very interested in me. And they're beautiful, you know, these are beautiful Highland cows, but having worked with cattle for a long time, I knew how dangerous they could be as well. And certainly the ones with young at foot can be very, very territorial. So I escaped back to the water's edge and tentatively walked back towards my tent when I saw that they had decided that I wasn't that interesting after all. And as I was walking to my tent, so was a lady who'd just driven up in a big 4x4. And she introduced herself as the farmer who owned this land and owned the cows. And I instantly thought, oh God, she's going to ask me to move, going to tell me I can't camp here. It's her land, please can you leave? And my first thought was like, I can't, I have no energy left to paddle anymore today. Also the tides are wrong, there's nowhere for me to go. I'm exhausted, I just need to go to bed. And instead she invited me in for a bottle of wine. So I went round to her lovely big farmhouse and met her husband. These are Jeanette and David, and we spent the entire evening chatting. I told her about the story of the cow that I'd just seen previously chewing on plastic. I told her how upset I was by it. I explained to her why I was paddling. And instantly she came back to me with stories of her cows and how she'd had to have the vet actually physically cut some of the cows open to remove plastic from the stomachs because they were starving to death because of all the plastic in there. And again, just when I needed people to talk to about this, she was there, and she was there to share in this story and to share in my passion. And she gave me lots of wine, and she filled up my water bottles, and she let me shower in her lovely house. Even offered me somewhere to stay, but I was quite happy staying in my tent. And she made me a batch of rock cakes to take with me the next day to keep me going on my journey. And just when I needed that human love and compassion and rock cakes, there was someone there to provide them. And also, before I went to bed, she told me a story about a battle of the spoiling Dike, which was basically whereby there was a big battle between two of the Scottish clans in the 1500s, and everybody except one person died in this battle. It was a big bloody battle, and all their bodies were buried right under where I'd pitched my tent. So I had a very, very fitful night's sleep that evening. But nevertheless, I set off the next day with renewed energy, with renewed morale, and a bag full of rock cakes, which lasted me about 2 hours. So 2018, so Isle of Skye was 2017. 2018, I decided I was going to paddle the whole length of the UK from Land's End to John O'Groats. And this is something I've been planning for several years and really, really had been kind of working towards, I suppose, in my other expeditions. And I was so touched by the aloneness of the Isle of Skye, that real sense of peace and that sort of quality of peace of being on the water alone and having that time camping when I was paddling around the Isle of Skye, that I decided I wanted that for Land's End to John O'Groats as well. And I was very stubborn, and I told my boyfriend and my parents, I'm doing this alone, I'm going to camp every night, and they were like, yeah, of course you are. And I also wanted to raise lots of money for 2 mental health charities that I was very passionate about. I was trying to raise awareness of plastic pollution and demonstrate all the wonderful things happening the length of the UK to tackle plastic pollution. I was going to make a film, all these things which are completely humanly impossible to do as a one-man band, but I was so determined that I was going to do it solo. And it very, very soon transpired that this was going to have to be a team effort. And it was a team effort, and it was the most difficult and the most wonderful 2 months of my life. And I'm going to show you a short video which sums it up much better than I could in words, and then I'm going to tell you a few stories of the kindness of strangers during this trip as well. Oh no, I've got the spinny beach ball of death. There we go. Okay. So there were lots and lots of incidences of my friends coming to help. I had one friend who came and joined me in Cornwall in her van with her dog because she knew I was missing my friends and my dogs. And I stayed in her van for a couple of nights. I had a couple of friends who I just paddled 35 miles up the Bristol Channel and was absolutely knackered. And they joined me at a harbour. And when I came into the harbour, they already had a barbecue cooking with my dinner ready on the harbour wall. My mum and dad were absolutely amazing. So you might have seen through the journey, I did about 200 miles of canals and rivers, and the rest was ocean. My mum and dad had a link to my tracker, and they would regularly, when I was on the canals, they would just out of nowhere, like my dad would just jump out of a hedge on the side of the canal with the camera, and my mum would sort of jump off the side of a lock and have a plate of hot food and a cup of coffee there for me. And considering I'd said that I was doing this solo, having that support from people that I cared about and loved was absolutely vital. And similarly with my partner James, who made that trailer there and actually made the documentary, which I'll let you know the link to later. He was amazing as well, and you know, I'd be paddling out on the water completely alone 8 hours into a 12-hour day, absolutely exhausted, and hear his drone flying up above, and I've never really enjoyed the sound of drones before, except when you've been on your own for that period of time, and just to know that there's somebody watching you and somebody looking out for you and caring for you is incredibly comforting. So I wanted to tell you a couple of stories of the kindness of strangers, which particularly touched me. The first one was one of the most memorable paddles of the expedition for sure. So I can't show you on my mouse. My mouse doesn't seem to be wanting to show you here what I'm trying to talk about. But looking at the map here that we've got, this is the southwest point of Scotland, and that very, very sticky out bit on the very, very southwest bit, excuse me, that's called the Mull of Galloway. And I was coming from the east, so I was coming from, if you're looking at your screen, to the right of the screen. I was paddling in that direction from the right to the left of the screen as you're looking at it, towards that knobbly point that's sticking out. And that knobbly point is one of the most notorious tidal races in the entire UK, where there are 9 tides that meet there. It's very exposed to wind, and it's a real danger spot. There are a lot of shipwrecks there, and there are just, to make it even more exciting, a couple of great big rock stacks just off the edge called the Scares, which did scare me. And so understandably, I had to get the timing pinpoint perfect for this point to make sure that I was getting around there when the tides were perfect, but also when the wind forecast was suitable as well. On a stand-up paddleboard, as I'm sure many of you are aware, you're incredibly vulnerable to wind. The only bit of board that's in the water really is a very, very short fin. And so that's all that really anchors you in the water when there's a great big gust of wind that comes. And I've been looking at this forecast for days and days and days, and really racking my brains as to when I could get around that point. And I had a bit of a race on my hand because there was a great big storm coming in. I did not want to be stuck on the other side of that headland when the storm arrived. And it soon transpired, after hours and hours of trawling through the forecasts and the charts, that the only suitable window to get around that point was going to be at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was currently 20 miles away, across that horseshoe bay on the very left of the screen there, that upside down horseshoe. I was on the other side of that, 20 miles away. And that bay was also a military firing range, just to add into the excitement of that journey. And what this meant, to get around that point at 3 in the morning, meant setting off from where I was on the other side of the bay at 11 p.m, 11 o'clock at night. Now, bear in mind, I'm not really a night owl. I normally go to bed about 9 o'clock. This was a big ask. And I was really, really scared. I'd never paddled in the night before. I'd never had any need to paddle in the night before. I didn't think it was a thing that you could do. I just thought you paddle until there's no sunlight, and then you go to bed, and you can get up at first light, but apparently you can paddle in the dark as well. And I remember calling a person who's a good friend of mine now, Glyn Brackenbury, who kayaked Land's End to John O'Groats, and he was very, very kindly acting as a mentor for me, and he was talking me through some of these difficult sections, and he was really, really pivotal to me actually getting to John O'Groats with his advice and help. And I remember calling him and saying, I know, Glyn, this is a stupid idea, and you're going to tell me not to even think about it, but this is the only window we've got, and we've got to, go around at 3 in the morning. What do you think? Kind of hoping in the back of my mind that he was going to say, don't be so bloody ridiculous, Kyle, go to bed. But instead he said, yeah, great idea. The only difference of paddling during the night is there's no light, and you've got a GPS unit to navigate by, haven't you? I thought, oh God, this is actually going to happen now. So I set off at 11 o'clock in the night, shaking, physically shaking. I was unable to stand because I had no horizon to look at because it was pitch black, but also because I was shaking so much and because the water was quite choppy. The only thing I had to navigate on was my GPS unit and a lighthouse on the point, which was flashing every sort of 30 seconds to a minute. And I paddled as hard and fast as I possibly could through that pitch black water, constantly aware that at any point in time a big giant eye could pop up of a sea monster, or I could hit the Scares. And I paddled so fast that I got there an hour before I wanted to get there. And by this point in time, the tide was already flowing so fast that I couldn't paddle back. So I ended up basically being taken around this point by a tide which I had no control over, which was not the situation I'd hoped. I could hear all this water moving around me, but I couldn't see it, and I was absolutely petrified. And as the sun came up, I popped out around the bottom and the corner of the Mull of Galloway, and I was safe, and I was so unbelievably grateful. But I still had another 12-mile paddle on my hands to get to the harbour that I was hoping to stop at, where I'd be safe for the next couple of weeks while the storm blew over, if that's what it took. And so I kept paddling, and I was absolutely exhausted. It had been 11 o'clock in the evening when I set off, and it was, I think, early afternoon by the time I arrived at this harbour. And this harbour was called Port Patrick, and it's just on the, if you're looking at that map there, it's on the left-hand side of the very left-hand sticky out bit. And I rocked up to Port Patrick, absolutely dishevelled, could barely stand, could barely speak, dumped my bag and my board on the beach and basically just crawled to the nearest pub, and I passed out at a corner at a table in the corner of the pub, and I woke up to find myself surrounded by a group of amazing local people who were all looking at me and discussing between themselves what on earth this bedraggled woman was doing at their table in their pub. And I told them what I was doing. I told them why I was doing it. And I explained about my connection to plastic pollution and how I wanted to demonstrate all the amazing things that were happening to tackle plastic pollution in the aim of inspiring further action and further hope. And instantly they started telling me about all the amazing things they were doing in their community, and they cared too. And instantly they were my friends, and they took me and they looked after me. One of the guys ran a B&B, and he put me up in the comfiest bed I've ever slept in. Number 4 Port Patrick, if you ever go. Put me up for the night. The pub fed me. They gave me breakfast the next day. They were the most wonderful, caring bunch of people, and they all cared deeply about plastic pollution as well, because they were so connected and in love with their beautiful local environment. And so they organised a last-minute beach clean. They took me to the local primary school to talk to the kids there. And for 3 days, I hung out with my new friends, and the entire village just rallied around and supported me as best they could. And they are still to this day very, very good friends of mine. And anytime I'm up in the southwest of Scotland, I go and visit them and we have a laugh, and I go and stay at Simon's Place at the B&B, and we go swimming in the sea, and we do beach cleans, and we go to the kids at the school. And just knowing at that point in time, even though I had put my life on the line to get there, and I was really putting so much of myself out there, to know that I wasn't doing it in vain, to know that there were other people who cared about it as well, was so reassuring. And to just be a part of that community for a few days was so heartwarming. So the next story I wanted to tell you about, and I've got the best video of the entire presentation coming up, so stay tuned. So the next big crossing that I had to do after the Mull of Galloway was across to the Isle of Arran. So the Isle of Arran is about 20 miles off the coast of Scotland, or it was from where I was paddling to it. And again, this was a great big crossing. It was a really, really scary crossing. And as I was going across to the Isle of Arran, a big storm came through, which was really, really terrifying. And when I got to the Isle of Arran, I was met by a water sports instructor who let me use his kettle and his shower before I carried on and camped on this beautiful spot here. And I was pretty bedraggled by this point. This was about 2/3 of the way into my trip, and I was really quite exhausted. I also stank, and I was trying to wash my socks out and dry them over a fire to very little success. And I was really, really starting to feel it. I was really starting to feel very lethargic, very tired. Getting up day after day, trying to keep the miles up, just paddle day after day was getting pretty tiring. And I had another crossing to do after I'd paddled around the east coast of Arran. I had a 3-mile crossing. If you can just see in the distance there, you can see there's some islands. I had to cross over to those islands 3.5 miles away, and then continue paddling up a loch to get to the next place that I was going to stop that evening. And this is what it looked like. This is exactly what that crossing looked like. It was dark, and it was lumpy, and I was very, very tired. And my plan had been to camp the next night. My plan had been to do this crossing off the Isle of Arran, back onto the mainland of Scotland, and to camp that night, to find somewhere to wild camp before I carried on again. But I suddenly recalled, as I was looking at the map, I saw this place called Tarbert. And I thought, well, that's as good a place as any to stop in and try and find somewhere to wild camp. And they had shops, so I could get some food. And I suddenly recalled that I'd had a Facebook message from someone I'd never met before called Suze. And she said, if you're coming up, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of the loch, but if you're coming past Tarbert, give us a shout and come and stay with us. And I thought, well, I'll see how I feel. I'll see how I feel when I get to Tarbert. So I sent her a message saying, I'm coming up to Tarbert today. I don't suppose you're around. And as I approached Tarbert, the exhaustion really, really kicked in, and I was starting to feel very, very lethargic. And I almost washed up into Tarbert, actually, to be met by Suze and John at the harbour, waving at me with their massive camper van ready to pick me up and my board and take me back to their house. And as I got there, they gave me a massive hug, And I said, no, it's okay, I can wild camp. Said, you absolutely cannot wild camp. You're coming home with us and we're going to feed you and we're going to look after you. And I'm very independent, as we've established. And at first I was a bit reluctant. And as soon as I met them, as soon as I had that first big hug from these two strangers that I'd never met before, I knew that I had to do this. And they took me back to their house, this beautiful, great big eco house that they'd made themselves. And they fed me. And for 3 days, I wasn't able to paddle because the wind was so strong that I couldn't get back out into the loch. I tried one day with their assistance. You know, they drove me back to the water. They put me on the water. I managed half a mile before I had to get out again. And then they put my board back on the roof of their car and took me home for another 2 days and said, you're not going out again until the wind has settled down. And sometimes I need a talking to. And it was just perfect. And for 3 days with Susan John, these people I'd never met before, I was integrated into their community. They showed me around the local area. They took me to a local castle. I love castles. I'm fascinated by castles. They took me to a castle, which is where I am in this picture. And they really, really fed my soul. They not only helped me recover physically from the previous few weeks' exertion, they helped me recover mentally. They nurtured my soul and they washed my socks. And the best part of the entire time with them, they took me to one of their clubs that they go to with some of their friends. And John is a part of a barbershop quartet. And they let me listen to one of their amazing events. And
so I stopped the John B. sail. See how the mainsail sail. Call the captain ashore. Let me go home. Let me go home. Let me go home. Now I stopped the John B. sail. Well, you so broke out. I want to go home.
And believe me, when you've been alone paddling and camping on your own for the last few weeks, having some normality and having some friendship and some joy and singing is just what you need. And to this day, I'm still very good friends with Susan John. And last year when I cycled around the UK on a film tour, I stopped in on them again and was treated to another of the Fine Ciders specials. This is me with them last year as well. And it wasn't just the hard bits that were made better by strangers. This was one day I was paddling down Loch Lochy, and unbeknownst to me, my dad had texted one of his friends who was also sailing down Loch Lochy, and they came and found me, and on their sailing boat next to me, they sailed past me for about 5 miles, serenading me with their songs and their fiddles. And it was so lovely to be able to share in this beautiful moment with somebody else. And I think that's one of the things about solo expeditions is, not only are you alone in the bad times, but you're alone in the good times, and actually having people to share those wonderful moments with can be incredibly special. Okay, so I'm just going to check my notes, see if I've missed anything. All right, so this slide was to remind me to tell you about the kindness of my mother. Now, bear in mind that I'd asked my mum and dad to let me do this expedition solo. The final week of my expedition was a pretty tough week. I was having to get on the water at 2 a.m, then 3 a.m, then 4 a.m, then 5 a.m. for sequential days, because that's when the tides were right. And every day for a week, my mum and dad travelled up in their camper van to come and be land support for that week. And every day that week, my mum would get up with me an hour before I had to be on the water and make me breakfast and make sure that when I was on the water, I had an entire snack pack of food to go with me. And so I really do think I owe my last week of paddling and not bonking to my mum feeding me. So we can be as stubborn as we like, but we still all need our mums, don't we? Right. So the last thing I'd like to finish with is, obviously this expedition was largely about plastic pollution. Yes, I was raising money for mental health charities as well, but I was finding a lot of plastic in the canals that I was paddling up. And I couldn't collect it all at the time. And I actually found that the canals were the hardest part of the expedition, both because physically it's very difficult to just motivate yourself to keep paddling moment after moment after moment for up to 12 hours a day. but also because I was paddling past a lot of plastic and a lot of waste, and it felt very, very hopeless at times. And I'm a perpetual optimist, so for me to feel pessimistic about what we can do about plastic pollution was very, very unusual. And I think it was the constant bombardment of this almost lack of care of what was happening in the canals that really upset me, and the lack of connection to the fact that that plastic in the canals was on a journey straight out to sea. So after I'd finished the expedition, I actually went back to one of the worst hit areas on the canals, which was Wigan. And in one morning when I was paddling in Wigan during the expedition, I counted nearly 700 plastic bottles just in the first hour. And so I went back there to collect them. And a friend of mine, Alan, and his amazing group of paddlers at SUP North offered to come and help me. And again, being on the water for a couple of hours with these guys, picking up all the litter together, it wasn't a chore anymore. It was no longer heartbreaking. It was enjoyable. It was fun. It was positive, and we felt like we could really all be part of a community and part of something together. And knowing that even though this is an enormous crisis, this plastic pollution crisis, this is massive, it's bigger than all of us, it can feel very overwhelming and very daunting. But to be able to do that with a group of people who care as well, that's what kept me going. That's what got me to John O'Groats, knowing that I was never alone. Even though physically some days I was on my own on the water, I was never alone, and I knew that there were people I could count on to care as much as I did to look after these amazing places, and people I could count on for love and moral support along the way. So if there's one thing I'd like you to take from this, it is that if there's something you're passionate about, please don't be alone. Find your tribe of like-minded people who can really get involved with your passion as well. You can bounce ideas off each other, you can support each other, you can love each other, you can look after each other. And I think this is something we've learned so much during the last few weeks of lockdown, is just how important our communities are. Not just for actually physically looking after each other, but for our support, whether that's our friendship connections or our physical neighbourhoods. We might be alone in periods of time, but we're never really alone in the big picture and in the grand scheme of things. So that's it for me rambling on. And yes, if you have any questions, I hope you've popped them in the comments box, and I'm very happy to answer anything you have to ask. So thank you very much for listening. And the last thing I'd like to leave you with is, we did actually make a documentary of the Land's End to John O'Groats expedition, and it's on Vimeo on demand. And I think Ben's going to send around, or Chris are going to send around a follow-up email with some links in there. So there'll be a link there for you to be able to watch it online. So thank you very much for listening to me ramble on for 45 minutes.
Oh, thank you ever so much, Cal. I mean, what an inspiration, what a fantastic presentation, and what a brilliant example you set to all of us. I personally seen your documentary, and I really encourage people to go and watch that. It's on Vimeo. We will send through the link to all the people that are attending. We've got a few questions coming through, if you don't mind answering some of those. Sarah's asked, have your experiences made you believe that you really can do anything you put your mind to now?
Now that's a really, really good question. And I would say that it's a two-parted answer. The first part is, I am very aware now of my own limitations, in that I've developed a real deep respect for the power of the ocean, and I really realise how vulnerable and small I am in relation to the vast power of the ocean. Having said that, I think so often we tell ourselves stories, and we let society tell us stories about what we are and aren't capable of. And having been in these situations, in these expeditions, I've learned to realise what I really am and am not capable of. And it's so much more than I gave myself credit for. And it's only because I was there alone and with nobody to drag me out of those situations that I actually discovered that strength. And so for that, I'm really grateful. And that definitely transpires to my own life as well. And I think certainly with environmentalism as well, oftentimes we can feel like we're not very powerful as individual selves, but we are. We all have powers. And your own powers might be completely different to mine, and they might be completely complementary to mine, or, you know, everybody's got their own thing that they're very strong at. And sometimes I think we just need to give ourselves a bit of an opportunity to discover that. And I really think that going on adventures and sort of nudging out of our comfort zone and also spending time in nature can help us do that. Just going to turn my light on, hang on a sec. Might be able to see you better now. It's getting dark.
and we all know that going on adventures, like you say, are brilliant for our mental health, our physical health, and obviously taking on board a trip that you did from Land's End to John of Groats. I mean, how much planning did you actually do prior to the trip? Was it a year in advance? Can you let us have a little bit of information on that, Carol?
Yeah. So I've been thinking about it for several years. I think since, I remember when I first started stand-up paddleboarding, I went home one weekend and I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my dad, and we were looking at a map of the UK, and I was thinking, how can I paddle from Land's End to John of Groats? And I was looking at all the kind of inland waterways and seeing if they connected up. At that point in time, I had no idea that actually you could paddle us up on the ocean to those distances. So really it had kind of been in the making for 4 or 5 years. The actual sort of more technical planning was, I'd say it was probably for about 8 months, but not constant planning, you know, that was just 8 months of gathering information, getting the right books, the right resources, the right apps on my phone, connecting with Glyn, who it turns out lives down the road from me and had kayaked Land's End to John of Groats. He was a massive help. And then in terms of the sort of day-to-day planning, that can only really be done a day or two in advance because the wind forecasts are so changeable. And yes, the tides are really important, and you can sort of plan your way around the tides a little bit further in advance, but the wind forecasts when you're on a paddleboard are absolutely essential, and it doesn't take much for you to be at real danger if there's a slightly too strong a wind. So really it was a case of, while I was on the expedition, just planning every minute I wasn't on the water was spent checking charts and forecasts.
Yeah, and we all know that plans have to change quite rapidly sometimes in certain situations, of which I think you've certainly faced a few. One of the questions coming through is, do you have any other adventures, expeditions planned at this stage? In other words, what's next, Cal?
Oh, I did, but I don't know if I can do it now because of the coronavirus. So I don't want to say too much because it might not happen. But there's fortunately it's kind of UK based, and I just adore the UK. I think there's so much potential for paddling here, and I'm really starting to kind of look at my own carbon footprint and acknowledge that I have a big part to play here in the UK. You know, there are environmental atrocities all around the world, but we also need to focus on what we're doing close to home. So the next one will definitely be a UK expedition, but I think I'm going to have to wait and see what we're allowed to do when before I make any further plans with that.
Well, we'll all be looking forward to that, and hopefully you'll make a documentary of it as well. Have you got any plans for a book to come out, or are you purely focusing on the media side of it?
I'm currently writing a book, which has been a really interesting process. I think it's probably more discipline to write a book than it is to paddle the length of the country. It's a tricky one, and I think as well. So, as I said, a big part of my expedition was around mental health, and the film actually details a lot more about that side of things. And the journey for me was a real mental health journey for myself. So reliving it in the book, as cathartic as it is, and as much as I'm really enjoying writing the book, it's quite an emotional roller coaster going through it all again. So I think it's gonna be another few months before I'm finished with the book.
Well, we'll all look forward to getting that one. So keep us informed as to when it's finished and where we can all get it from. A couple of questions are coming in about kit. Did any kit get trashed on your adventure? What tent did you find the most useful on your journeys? And someone said, is there a potential kit list that we could have for the adventures that you would recommend? And we can obviously send that information out via via our emails.
No,
So did anything get trashed in particular?
No, I think if you go to my website, I think I've put a kit list on my website. So if you go to calmajor.com and then expeditions, Land's End John O'Groats, I think there's a kit list on there. But basically, I am sponsored by Palm. So Palm Equipment are one of my sponsors, and I am very, very careful whose kit I use and who I agree to be an ambassador for. And one of the reasons I'm an ambassador for Palm is that genuinely their kit is phenomenally durable. And from an environmental standpoint, that means that you have to buy one set of kit and use it again and again. And I'm still using the same kit that I used in my 2016 expedition, my first one around Cornwall. I'm still using the same kit now. So I'd really recommend, if you want some really good quality durable kit, to check out Palm Equipment. I use their PFD as well, which is a glide PFD. I use their Vantage jacket, and I use a mixture of their neoprene leggings and waterproof trousers, which are called Atom trousers. Now, those waterproof trousers I only discovered in 2018, and they were a complete game changer. So they doubled my mileage basically overnight, because I was no longer hypothermic on the bottom half, because I could keep nice and dry and warm. So that was really helpful. But what I can do, Chris, I'm happy to send over a kit list of everything that I used on the expedition, and then people can trawl through it at their own pace.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant. And you mentioned you think it's possibly on your website as well.
I think so, but I'm not.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, no problem. Another question here for you, Cal. Emma's asking, what were the costs of following your dreams and goals? And was it hard for your friends and family to accept your calling? You mentioned also your profession. You're a vet. And how long did you have to take time off work with your profession as well? Yeah.
So what's the cost of my expeditions? When I paddled around Skye, I couldn't call my mum. I had no phone signal basically. And I only found out afterwards that she was desperately worried about me. For 2 weeks, she cried almost every day. And I didn't know that at the time. And I think that's another reason I was so willing to let them help with my Land's End John O'Groats. That sounds really awful, doesn't it? I was willing to let them help. That sounds horrible. One of the reasons I wanted them to be a part of it after I thought about it properly. In terms of kind of them coming to terms with it, I think my parents have really seen the journey that I've been on, and James as well, my partner, my boyfriend. They've all gone through moments of real fear. They've all been on the end of phone calls when I've been in really bad ways, and had to talk me through that and suppress their own worries and fears to be able to support me. And I feel incredibly grateful for that. I try and involve them in all my decision making now, so that they understand where I'm at, and I think they've all come to an understanding that I am very, very capable on the water now, and I know my limitations. And that's taken a long time for me to be able to say that, for me to be able to now look at a forecast, and rather than say, oh yeah, I can fight that, I can battle that, to say, I'm not going to put myself into that situation. And I feel very, very grateful to them for supporting me, even though it's been I think at times quite tough for them. They've also absolutely loved it, and my mum and dad regularly reminisce with me about some of the most amazing times we've had when they've been land support, and we've met up at the end of the day, and the stories we've all had to share. In terms of a personal cost, after I finished paddling Land's End John O'Groats, I sunk into a very deep depression. Part of that was I was actually paddling with I was grieving for the loss of a very close friend, and I don't think I'd really handled that. But also, having paddled every day for 2 months and been pumped full of endorphins and sense of achievement and adrenaline for 2 months, to then stop that and have nothing was really, really detrimental to my mental health. And I became very, very depressed. And that was, getting through that depression, that was scarier and more, much more challenging than actually paddling Land's End John O'Groats. It was the scariest thing I've ever had to do is battling depression. And although I wouldn't wish it upon anybody, I feel very grateful to have come through the other side and maybe be able to relate just a little bit to people. And I feel like I'm going a bit off topic here, but I feel very passionately about mental health, and I'm actually in the process of setting up a charity now to try and to try and help people support their mental health through time in the ocean, and to use that to form connections that people want to protect the oceans as well. So yes, there have been lots of hidden costs, lots and lots of hidden costs, but I wouldn't say that any of them negate the benefits or the learning or the experiences or just the sense of empowerment that's come from doing these expeditions. And I really think my mum and dad and James would say the same. You know, they, as much as they've seen me go through really, really hard times and had to support me through that, I think that they appreciate kind of the necessities of those things. Yes. Sorry, I couldn't lost my focus. Sorry, Chris.
Oh, I mean, thank you ever so much for, you know, talking about the mental health aspect, and we're really glad to hear that you've come through that. It's a massive challenge. So thank you for being very brave and talking, you know, very openly on that. Do you think that we have, or we give enough emphasis to mental health through water sports? Do you think we could do more? We all know there's charities out there as well. And the water aspect and paddling, surfing, such a great way for people to take themselves away from the stress and the mental issues that they're facing.
I think it's a really, I think everybody's mental health journey is very personal. And I don't think there's any shame in people not wanting to share their own mental health journey and keeping it quite private. I personally feel that the more we talk about it and the more we realise that everybody has mental health, whether you have mental illness or not, every single one of us has mental health. I think the sooner we normalise that concept, the quicker we'll be able to look after our mental health and the mental health of the people within our communities. In terms of water sports, I think there's some amazing initiatives coming out for helping people with sort of connecting to the idea that water is very, very beneficial for mental health. I've spoken to Ben quite a bit about this, Ben at Water Skills Academy, quite a bit about this. I know he's really passionate about it too. And it's really interesting, when I did the film tour last year, I didn't really expect to have as many open and exciting conversations about this as I did. And it turns out that there are so many people around the UK who care just as much as we do and are just as passionate about helping. You know, they've realised that being around the water and water sports have been beneficial for them, and they want to spread that message too. So that's kind of a part of the charity that I'm setting up is going to be to sort of connect those dots between people and help that to happen. But in terms of whether we should or, you know, could be doing more, I think, yes, maybe there's more we can do to be open about it. But also, you know, until 3 years ago, I wouldn't be on this. I wouldn't be talking about this, and this is only because I've had my own experience with it that I feel able to kind of sit here and talk about it. You know, before 3 years ago, I hadn't had depressive episodes. I hadn't suffered from anxiety, and this was a completely alien concept to me. So I don't think we should be shaming people for not including this in their mission statements. But if it is something that people are passionate about, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to talk openly and to be able to help people that maybe don't really quite appreciate just how powerful those connections to the water can be.
Yeah, very wise words. You mentioned you're in the process of setting up a mental health charity now. Is there any further details of that you can provide us with?
So it's not. It's basically where mental health and environmentalism intersect. So it's not specifically just mental health. It's
okay.
It's all about reconnection. It's about reconnection to our natural world. I feel like one of the big reasons we have so much apathy towards environmentalism and so much environmental destruction is that as a human race, you know, we've become disconnected from nature and from what it means to be a human as part of that natural world. And I really, really believe that reconnecting to nature is the first key step in driving a desire to protect it. And why do people connect to places? People, in my experience of a lot of the people I've met who are really connected to the natural world, really connected to the oceans, it's because they're appreciative of how important it is for their mental health. And so it's kind of where the two collide. And the charity is going to be physically reconnecting people to the oceans, to the waterways, to nature, to improve mental health, to help people fall in love with those environments, and so they want to protect them as a result. So it's kind of a double-edged nice sword.
So fantastic. I mean, again, Carl, as soon as you have further details on that one, you know, please let us know, and we'll do all we can to help on that side of things. So on a slightly different note now, so you mentioned you had your first challenge of paddling at night. And for those of us who have done that, it is, especially the first few times that we do it, it is pretty challenging. Lily's asking, she says, well, night paddling sounds terrifying. What helped you to stay paddling and to not fall off? I mean, how did you balance with not having a viewpoint to focus on? How did you cope with that?
Yeah, that was one of the most challenging parts physically, actually. So I actually I found a little cushion and I used that to kneel on, and that protected my knees. I basically knelt down the whole way to keep my centre of gravity low, to keep my balance. I could see the lighthouse flashing every now and again, so I kind of knew where the horizon was. But I just had to kind of, I had to let my body do its thing. And over a period of time, my eyes became a bit accustomed to seeing the water level and to kind of seeing things. But it's very challenging. I kind of got into the rhythm of it as I went along, and I'm really, really glad I did that night paddle, because it meant that later on in the trip, when I had to paddle every night for a week, I could do it, and rather than it being absolutely terrifying, it was really enjoyable. I'm not sure if I'd have said the same at the time, but looking back with rose-tinted spectacles, it was very enjoyable.
And what was the longest time that you spent paddling through the night then?
So the longest day was 64 miles, and that was basic. I think I had about 4 hours off the water in a 24-hour period.
Wow.
I basically got to Inverness through the Caledonian Canal, had, I think, 4 hours off the water, had a couple of hours sleep, and then got back on as soon as the tide was ready, in the middle of, I think I got on about midnight or something. Ridiculous. And paddled out through the night there.
Yes, and there's well, total respect. 60 miles, did you say?
64 miles, I think it was. 64 miles.
Lovely question just come in from one of our ambassadors, Michelle. Said, how did you cope with the land wobble when you got back onto land? You know,
the land wobble.
Yeah.
Oh God. I was all right actually, but I did, for about 5 days after I finished, I had nightmares every night where I'd wake up in the middle of the night. So I have night terrors anyway, so I'd wake up screaming several nights a month anyway. But anyway, I wake up and I'm like, I've got 10 miles left to paddle, I can't be asleep. And I had these recurring nightmares that I still had 10 miles left to go, and I'd just sacked it off and gone to bed. But the land wobbles were okay.
Yeah. And nothing like clean socks as well to inspire you for the next leg of a journey, eh?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
The simple pleasures.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to wrap it up there, Carl. It's been a fantastic presentation, and thank you ever so much for taking the time to do this and for inspiring us all. We can see the video on Vimeo, your documentary on Vimeo. You've got a book coming out. We're going to find out about your next challenge soon, hopefully, and we'll have some details of your mental health charity as well. So I'd just like to say, what an inspiration. Keep up the good work. Thanks everyone for attending. I hope you really enjoyed that. We'll have a series of these. For those of you who don't know, we've got development sessions coming up on the Wednesdays, and every Friday at the same time we have these free webinars as well. Everything's on the WSA Facebook, and maybe, Carl, we could get you to attend the symposium that we're having in October, the WSA symposium, if you're not busy. So we have an open invitation there, so we can catch up with some of the people that you have been watching tonight. So thanks ever so much. Thank you everyone for attending, and stay safe, and we'll catch you all again, hopefully either next Wednesday or next Friday.
And big thanks for me as well. Thank you guys. Thanks so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cal. Bye.